Does cutting taxes spur growth or cause harm? Can the government spend us out of the recession? That's the question coming up on today's episode of the Economists Militia.
Cutting taxes is the best way to stimulate the economy. So said nearly every Republican member of Congress in 2009. Democrats responded with a $700 billion spending program, and President Barack Obama publicly supported the idea that the federal government had to spend its way out of our recession. And now $1 trillion budget and $1 trillion health care bill are in the queue. One party tells us that cutting income taxes will help the economy, and the other party tells us we have to spend our way out of the recession. Both say the other is wrong. Who's right? In an earlier episode, we talked about John Maynard Keynes and his economic ideas. Keynes was a British economist who developed theories around interventionist government policy, including an idea that a massive influx of government spending will stave off a recession. They were widely adopted in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and they produced awful results, and they were abandoned by the mid-70s. President Obama's quote is a direct reflection of Keynes' ideas, and we've already talked about why Keynes' ideas are heavily flawed. When Keynes looked at government spending during a recession, he reasoned that deficit spending would moderate or end a recession by causing a market for business output. Essentially, the government would buy stuff.
He further reasoned a multiplier effect would help the growth, since the government spending would be echoed by spending in private business. The flaw in Keynes' model, and the reason his policies were seen as failures a quarter century ago, is that government spending requires government borrowing, and government borrowing takes money out of the economy before it puts money back into the economy. The net result is a deepening of the recession and limited, if any, benefit.
Keynes is what you could think of as feel-good economics. If you keep spending until everything is all right, eventually everything will be all right. Were that true, bankruptcy would never be necessary and candy would grow on trees.
Ah, candy trees. Where are you? But one side being wrong doesn't mean the other side is right. So let's look at the idea that cutting taxes helps spur the economy. Robert Mundell, a Nobel-winning professor of economics at Columbia University in New York, along with fellow economist Art Laffer, built a model around what we generally think of as supply-side economics, which says that with a trade of goods or services equally favorable to both the buyer and the seller, that any intrusion into the trade will skew favorably to either the seller or the buyer, but not both. That lopsided shift is unfair to one of the parties, and so it is inherently damaging. What may not be obvious in that description is that, to supply-siders, taxes are as significant an intrusion as regulation. Supply-siders believe simply in the elimination of taxes and regulation, since they are intrinsically lethal to a fruitful economy. So effectively, supply-siders believe that every tax cut will help the economy by letting the market work freely. But some taxes are required to provide for the common defense, among other things. So does any tax cause the supply-side model to fail immediately?
No, of course not. It's important to say it that way, though, since so often we hear a pundit or politician give one doesn't-work example and then trash the entire idea. Thoughtful review tells us that way of thinking is, well, stupid. What does experimental data show about supply-side economics? The tax cuts proposed in 1924 by Andrew Mellon, then Secretary of the Treasury, did produce significant improvements in the GDP until 1929, and the Reagan tax cuts in 1981 took place before a series of major economic improvements. Of course, Reagan also engaged in deficit spending, granted on a smaller scale relative to our current and immediate past presidents, and the deficit spending, which is backed by Keynesian economics, combined with tax cuts backed by supply-side economics, makes an outcome a little bit difficult to decipher. Adoption of supply-side economics across the world followed the abandoning of Keynesian ideas in the late 70s, and it was the model primarily in effect for the collapse of the dot-com bubble in 1999 and the Wall Street collapse of 2008. Ironically, politicians decided they want it both ways, to cut taxes and increase spending. That model is firmly in place today, with President Obama promising to both spend us out of the recession and offering massive tax cuts to people who already pay no taxes. I think we can all agree that model has no basis in math, no basis in reality, and an appallingly populist tone. Tell truth to power. Hear the real story. Think for yourself. Join the conversation at econmilitia.com. Take back your inalienable rights.